Hey everyone, it is Justin here. I'm coming to you from Lago de Chapala, Lake Chapala in Jalisco, Mexico. So I've been living in Guadalajara for the past 3 months, more or less, but I've actually never been here before. It's only an hour away from Guadalajara, and I can tell you the vibe is very, very different here. Going from the second largest city in Mexico to a chill little town on the lake here. It's a very different vibe, but Lago de Chapala, it's actually the largest freshwater lake in all of Mexico. So I'll go ahead and pan the camera around so you can get a view of this place. As you can see here, the lake is really, really enormous, and the the mountains, the landscape surrounding the lake is really beautiful as well. And yeah, there's a really interesting mix here because obviously you got the mountains, but you've also got this huge lake, which kind of gives it a beachy vibe, even though it's not technically the beach. But here in the Lago de Chapala area, there's a lot of different cities scattered around the perimeter of this enormous lake. And this is actually a pretty popular spot with American retirees because this place, it has the elevation of Denver and the latitude of Hawaii. So over there to the west, there's actually another town called Ajijic. Right now I'm in Chapala. So the name of the lake is Chapala, and I'm currently in the largest city on the perimeter of the lake, which is also called Chapala. But to the west there's a smaller town called Ajijic. And there is a pretty high concentration of American retirees there. And in this video, I want to talk about some of the push factors that cause people to leave the US, whether you're a retiree with a pension or whether you're someone like me that has location-independent income. Basically, the question is, why are certain people leaving the US to come live in places like Chapala or Ajijic or Guadalajara? So stay tuned for that. Okay, so before I dive into this topic, I want to point out that my perspective is that of someone from a younger generation. I was born in 1995, and today is actually my birthday, so I am turning 24 today. And I just want to point that out because growing up in the US varies a lot from generation to generation. Obviously, growing up as a boomer is way different than growing up as a Gen X. And so I'm kind of in between millennial and Generation Z, because I'm on the tail end of the millennials, and honestly I don't know which group I relate to more. I'm still giving that quite a bit of thought, but in many ways I guess you could say I am one of the stereotypical millennials, and I know how a lot of people like to talk about how us millennials are very entitled. And yeah, so I would like to talk about some of these things. And this is a really complicated topic, so I'm going to try to keep this as focused as possible. I could honestly make an hour or 2 hour long video about this, but I'm going to try to boil it down to the main points. So first of all, whenever you're growing up in the US, you know, as someone from my generation, things really, really get hard whenever you graduate high school. Like after you graduate high school, you have to go out and live on your own. The thing is that if you compare, say, like the boomers to what the millennials had to go through in terms of the price of college, the price of houses, how easy it is to get a job, a like full-time job straight out of, say, high school or even college. Based on what I understand, like the cost of living, goods were considerably cheaper back then. For example, like working your way through college was something that was actually feasible. It's not really feasible today, simply because the cost of college has just skyrocketed. And I just feel like overall wages, well, I don't feel like, I know that overall wages have stagnated. So here's the thing. In the US, I have absolutely no interest in returning to the US anytime soon to live. I've been living outside of the US for the better part of 2 years now. And you might go, oh, that's nothing. Like that's no time. Well, I mean, like I said, I'm only 24. I just turned 24. And if you're only 24, spending, 2 years of your life almost consecutively outside of the US, that's a pretty good chunk of time. And what I realize is that the US is a system, at least now, it has morphed into this crazy, hyper-capitalistic system where everything runs on debt. We're talking about like basic human rights, like education and healthcare, that have become extremely commodified. And you might go, oh, that's just your millennial entitlement speaking. Like, yo, you're not entitled to healthcare, you're not entitled to education. I mean, do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? Of course, people should be entitled to education. People should be entitled to healthcare. If you look at any of the other developing countries, or sorry, any of the other developed countries around the world, you'll see that collectively as a society, they have come to the conclusion that yes, people deserve healthcare as a right. People deserve education as a right. These are things that you need to live a good life, okay? Now, if I was saying, oh, I deserve a Lamborghini or a Porsche, like I deserve that as a right. Okay, no, that doesn't make any sense. And yes, that is you being entitled. You're not entitled to something that is not a need. But what I am talking about are things that are either needs or things that are practically needs. These are things that you need to live a fulfilled life. I mean, obviously, if you don't have education, like if you don't have higher education, that doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean you can't survive. It just means it's harder to survive. And I'm saying that, if we have the capability as society to allow people to live as fulfilled lives as possible, that's something we should do, and we should not just say, oh, well, you're being entitled because you want to live a more fulfilled life, okay? So I know some people might disagree with me about these things, but in terms of the world as a whole, in terms of the developed countries as a whole, most people in developed countries are in agreement with me on this. And with the US now, we've got a highly corrupt government. The government is absolutely run by money and corporations. It's essentially an oligarchy. It's not really a democracy. Whenever roughly 90% of the candidates that get elected are the ones that raise the most money, you can't really call that a democracy. And if you're looking at the US government's actions around the world and our allies, it's pretty clear that it's not just about democracy and freedom and spreading those ideals. No, it's about making us more money. That's what it ultimately boils down to, in terms of our foreign policy and in terms of the domestic policy. And when I say making money, I'm talking about the people at the top making as much money as possible. The overall population is not doing too well whenever 80% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. But so why are some people living paycheck to paycheck? Well, if you look at the system, if you want to succeed in the US, unless you're coming from a really wealthy family, you got to go into insane amounts of debt for things that should be basic rights, like higher education. Oh, go into insane debt. That's a solution. Oh, you want a car because we have terrible public transportation and you literally need a car to get around our cities. oh, we'll just go into debt. You want to have a roof over your head. I mean, in some cities, some of the major cities in the U.S., the cost of a house is just absurd. Even renting is a challenge for a lot of people, let alone taking out a huge mortgage and then spending decades paying that off. A lot of people are just struggling to pay rent month to month. And so we have this system where if you want to succeed in the U.S., if you want to, I'm not even talking about success. If you just want to go through the motions, like if you just want to, it's not like you really have a choice. It's like you're forced into this system where either you go into debt or you're just done. You're done. That's game over. And I'm a very debt-averse person. I went to university for 2 years until I realized, yeah, this is probably not for me, and I don't want to go into insane debt to get a job, to maybe get a job that I hate and live in a city that I don't enjoy living in. It just didn't make sense to me. And so after 2 years of going to the University of Texas at Austin, I decided to just stop. I decided to just do something on my own. I decided that there's just so many push factors in the US. So for me, there's the push factors of I just don't really enjoy being in this country, and it's hard to make it without making a lot of sacrifices and without basically making a lot of decisions, being forced into decisions, into actions that I don't want to take. I decided that it would be better for me to just do something on my own and go live abroad. Basically, I had this epiphany moment when I was in college. I realized that if I could set up an online business that allowed me to generate at least $1,000 online per month, that I could live extremely well in loads of countries around the world, like Mexico. I could live extremely well on $1,000 a month, and I would not have to go into debt. And so, I mean, the thing about the US is that every single year the cost of living is increasing, and the property is just, like I said, the property is very expensive, and it's getting more expensive year by year. Of course, it's a bubble, and it's gonna, of course, property prices are gonna come down again. It's always, it always fluctuates. But even at the low points, it's still, for someone my age, with the wages that most people my age are earning, trying to pay for a house, it's quite challenging. And now let's look at the flip side. Let's look at what I've been doing. I started my online business, and now I've been traveling all over the world because I love to travel and I love to learn about new cultures. But I've also spent a considerable amount of time, I spent about a year here in Mexico, and I'm working online, like I said, making at least $1,000 a month, and I live well below my means, and I take the money that I save and I'm investing it. And that's the thing that's crucial. If you're saddled by debt, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, like 80% of the people in the US, and you have hardly any money left over at the end of each month to invest, that's really bad for your financial future. I mean, there's a lot of Americans that are really struggling to have savings, to have a pension. And the thing is, the earlier that you can put that money aside, the bigger an impact it has for you, because obviously compound interest is a great thing. And so really what I've done is I've bypassed a lot of the debt, or really all the debt. I've never been in significant debt in my life, and now I'm saving up money for a property. And obviously the property here in a place like Mexico or somewhere else in the world, some other developing country, it is so much more accessible, so much more accessible. Say with $100,000, you can outright buy an amazing place. Whereas with, say, like 50K in the US, maybe you put down like 20% on some house, and then you still have to pay off the other 80%. And so I know I've been rambling a lot, and I know I've been saying quite a few things that are probably controversial, but this is just something that I want to get off my chest. I think it's a really important topic to discuss. But for these reasons I've outlined, I just feel like there are a lot of push factors. And obviously a lot of this applies to retirees as well. If you've got Social Security, whatever that amount might be, I don't know what the average is, but I'm thinking it's got to be around $1,000, something like that. That's why you've got so many Americans living right over there. Right over there. Also, many other places throughout Mexico, many other places throughout the world. It just seems like the middle class is just getting absolutely obliterated in the US. And I feel like finally, well, many people are waking up to this and they're realizing it doesn't have to be this way. I don't have to stay here. And people are looking for better lives. I recently read that the US is one of the most stressed out countries in the world, and it doesn't surprise me at all. Here in Mexico, sure, people might be poorer, but I mean, look around, you can see you've got a lot of people. This is a Thursday, and people are just out walking about, enjoying the park, enjoying their lives. People are way more easygoing here, and I gotta say, after making these decisions in my life, I really have no regrets. I think that in terms of my quality of life, things are better outside the US. In terms of my financial situation, definitely better outside the US. Really, for me, and I'm not just trying to say that everything about the US is negative. Obviously, there's some good things. One of the good things is that it's a great place to do business, but here's the facts. Here's the fact of the matter. You don't have to actually live in the US to take advantage of the business opportunities there. Nowadays, you can do that remotely. So I'm trying to get the best of both worlds, right? The good weather of Mexico, the laid-back lifestyle, the lower cost of living, that's here in Mexico, but I'm working remotely for companies in the US and making US dollars, making a good income, and obviously trying to do my best to invest and save that money in the long term. So I know this has been a big rant, but hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully you found it valuable. And with that being said, I'm gonna sign out. Thanks.